life is valuable and, you know, finite, you know? So
Absolutely.
live it.
So, how do you cope with all of that trauma?
A drink now and then. I hope my hospital's not listening, but we would sneak alcohol in sometimes and like literally have a drink at night. Everyone should have a therapist. Everyone.
I agree. Therapists have therapists, just so we're clear.
And welcome back to Counterpunch Podcast, where life hits you hard and we hit back harder. This evening's guest, I'm really excited about, coming all the way from Maywood, New Jersey. Unbelievable cancer warrior mother, 2 beautiful children. Everybody say hello, hello, hello to Miss Lauren Murphy.
Hi, Lauren.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Heck yeah, thanks for hopping on and joining us here. So Lauren, you've read the book, 6 Rounds to Resilience, which is what we're basing this off of every week. But before the book, I've known you for a while, and we've had to be resilient pre 6 Rounds to Resilience. And so why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself if you like.
Okay. Well, yeah, prior to you, I entered into this world. I will say I have 2 children. I have a 9-year-old now, almost 10, and a 6-year-old. And when I was pregnant with my 6-year-old, kind of to predate some of the pre-meeting of us, I got a prenatal diagnosis of Down syndrome for my daughter. I think I was like 12 weeks. It was my 12-week sonogram. I was at work. I worked for a big ad agency in Manhattan, and I got a phone call at work mid my work day that all results were showing that my daughter had Down syndrome. Went through a lot of grief with that. Honestly, like throughout my pregnancy was just praying that she didn't have it, that this can't happen, all these things. And then I think I hit a breaking point of like talking to other families who had children with Down syndrome and really realizing that I was like asking God and the powers that be to change who this little girl was going to be. And then just kind of came to this point of like acceptance of like, okay, she's going to be who she's going to be, and it's going to be amazing, and we'll make it work. And I'm scared and I'm terrified and I have no idea what's going to happen, but we'll figure it out. And, had her on July 20th, 2017, perfect, cute little baby, very healthy. And I just remember being like, wow, I can't even imagine, my life now without her. Fast forward, I just remember being like, she's great. Just don't give us cancer. Because I read a book that said all of these things that you have to worry about with kids with Down syndrome. And, that was kind of my prayer up to say, please just don't give us that. And then I saw these signs and these things on my daughter's legs. She was very pale. She was learning to walk at 2 years old. So it was kind of just a weird time frame. I was like, she's falling. She's got bruises because she's falling. And she was getting nosebleeds. And then I noticed these little red dots on her leg, which I discovered were petechiae, and brought her to the doctor after a work trip, which I literally took I was in LA for 2 days, flew home, and was like, oh, these things are still on her leg. Let me bring her to the doctor. Brought her to the doctor, and they did a blood work. They did a CBC, a complete blood count in the doctor's office. And I remember they were just like, what are you afraid of? And I was like, I'm afraid she has cancer. And then we were sent to the hospital. They said, we want you to bring her to the hospital immediately. And literally did all the things. And the next day, I remember the nurse practitioner was like, your daughter, has acute lymphoblastic leukemia. She was 2 years. She literally just turned 2. And I mean, my world shattered. I was like, okay, so what happens? I mean, you're now thrust into a new world. And I mean, it hits you like a ton of bricks. And I remember just even saying, well, so when do we go home? She's like, oh, you're not going home for at least 30 days. And I was like, what? So, um, yeah, it was a little crazy. Just getting, the worst news that any parent should ever have to hear, you know.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, and then you guys were also, was Mac, that's your daughter's name for our listeners, Mighty Mac.
Mike,
Um,
That's cute.
were you guys still in active treatment? You're on the East Coast, you're in the thick of
Mhm.
it. You're at, whatever, New Jersey, right outside of New
Yep.
York, when
Right
COVID
out.
hit.
We're like 15 minutes out of the
Yeah,
city. So
and so
yeah.
you're talking about resiliency and things getting crazy. Are you guys in active treatment? You are. You're in active treatment when COVID hits, right?
Oh, when COVID, yeah, we were.
Absolutely.
I remember specifically. So I'm in North Jersey. We're 15 minutes over the GW Bridge, the George Washington Bridge, which was one of like the big bridges going into the city. Um, and uh, I remember sitting in. We were currently inpatient for a staph infection. Mac had 8. In her port. Her port just constantly got infected. After it had flipped, and they had to have surgery to repair it. So there was many, many surgeries. She had MRSA. We had been through the things, and I just remember sitting in our hospital room and watching the news, and they started talking about COVID. And I remember her team was going for rounds, and the doctors came in, and I had this look of panic on my face, and they were like, well, what's the problem? And I'm like, well, I'm terrified. What is this? What is happening? And do I now, who I have a 5-year-old at the time in kindergarten at school, and my husband's a teacher, I was like, do I just pull my kids out of school? Because my daughter wasn't, she was too young for school. So I was in this full on panic mode of calling the pediatrician to say, my son's going to be home from school. And then we get the email from school that says, we're going to be out for 2 weeks. So prepare yourself and whatnot. And I mean, New York, New Jersey, the tri-state area was a little insane. I don't, I mean, we're hearing on the news that the hospitals were flooded. There were shipping containers outside of hospitals because the bodies were there were so many people dying that bodies were there was nowhere to put them. They were, I mean, I don't know the truth, right? I wasn't in that situation. I was in the ICU, but at the thick of it, we had nurses who were being sent from peds oncology down to adult ICU, and then we're back on my floor the next night.
Oh my gosh. I think I would just have the biggest holy cow. My head
Yeah.
would explode.
And they
So
were
how,
looking, I mean, and we were in and out during COVID. So thankfully, we would be in the ER if we had to be admitted overnight, or it was scary. I remember going in with like 3 masks on, an N95, then whatever it was, and just I bought a Mac was, had gone through some neuropathy at certain points too during treatment, so I used to have to put her in a stroller. I would bring her in a stroller, and I got she wouldn't wear a mask, so I got a rain cover, and would walk her through the hospital with the rain cover on as just extra protection. And I remember people were like, you're crazy. And I'm like, I don't care, because she doesn't have enough immune system to fight
Mhm.
something off. And again, I think we were, like at the mercy of what was real and not real. And, I was terrified.
Absolutely. Absolutely. To take that, the world's worst news and then you make it like 100 times worse.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
what do I do now? Like,
Yeah.
you
Oh,
know.
I was on my power trip on Facebook, on social media. I'm like, if, we don't know, right? Like, we don't know what's happening. Uh, but my daughter needs a hospital bed when she needs one. So
Absolutely.
please be safe so that mine can get one when she
Yeah,
needs
absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely.
So how did you deal with that level of anxiety?
Well, not great. I will say, not great at first. Uh, I actually have anxiety. I've had it since I was little, but I think being thrust into this, you know, world was a whole nother level. You're very powerless watching your child suffer. Um, you want to fix the problems you can't. And they're looking at you, especially because they're so little, they're kind of looking at you for safety, and you're like, I can't provide it. I mean, you can, but you can't. And um, so I think, the thing that really helped me in some ways was watching the kids. You're watching these tiny humans who really have not lived life, and they are showing up every single day. They're going through treatment. They're taking on, like, battling literally their inner demon, their bodies, to cure themselves of this horrible disease. And we're just sitting there watching and praying that it works. But they're showing up. They're playing amongst one another. They become friends internally at the, like, in the, you have a whole child life team who does activities with these kids. And sometimes during COVID they couldn't, so we would write letters to each other on the doors to one another. But these kids were incredible to watch. They're
Absolutely.
mighty warriors. They are.
I agree with that. And I think you have my book handy. I wish I had it handy. But there's where I touch on that on the book. I actually do more than
Yeah.
touch on it. And I say specifically being on that floor, being on the oncology floor, and you see this resilience in these children. And
Yeah.
it's amazing and it's mind blowing. And my comparison in the book is you see an adult who gets a headache or they
Yeah.
step on a Lego and they're out.
Yeah. Yeah.
I literally wrote that. I'm like, they're out for the count.
Oh no, I felt that.
Yeah.
That part of your book. I was
You
like,
know, and I really touch on where at some point in life we lose that resilience, all of us. I don't know at what age or what stage, but we lose it. And I really, want to bring people, back to it. Like, dude, these
right.
little kids on the oncology floor can do what they do with a smile on their face. It
Yeah.
really kind
If
of
we
puts
can
things
get
in
through
perspective.
the harder stuff.
Yeah, then we shouldn't be complaining about, 97% of the stuff that we complain about, uh,
Right.
daily, and it's very, very moving to see those kids, all of them, some of which did not have such happy endings, but they all have,
Right.
like, this wonderful demeanor and mindset,
Yeah.
and so, yeah, I know I sure used Easton's energy a lot in there, and, she got me through a lot of bad days, as
I
crazy
know.
as that sounds, but
I agree. I
yeah,
totally agree. I think
yeah.
sometimes seeing Max smile, or honestly, like, even on your feed, I'm like, okay, Easton's doing well today. Like, you were a month ahead of treatment for us.
Yeah,
So in some ways I was living vicariously through you guys. And I'm like,
yeah,
okay, our girls can do this. They're going to
right?
get through this. They're going to power
Yeah.
through. And then I remember reading something a long time ago, or maybe during treatment, that it said, your children show you who they need you to be.
Exactly. That's exactly what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Yep. And I felt that, and I was just like, okay, well, listen, I can't fix the cancer for her. She's got to fight that part, but I can take the mental and
Mhm.
the emotional load for her. I can, like, she's got to really work at this physically to in some ways cure herself, but let me take on the hard stuff and be that bravery for her while she's being brave herself. Um, but I really think everything is, I mean, I'm huge on perspective too. I think, this is not the perspective I wanted to know, but it's shifted a lot of things in my life now. I mean, things are just not as important, and I
Everything
think
shifted. Yeah. It's weird. Isn't it weird?
it
Like,
is
it's
weird.
literally it's like pre-cancer diagnosis of the kiddo after it's like 2 different lives.
It is too, yeah,
It's
totally.
literally
I know.
2, like,
There's
not
just
even a
certain
new
things that I'm
chapter.
like, I'm not
Full
gonna care
life.
about this today.
Yeah.
'Cause, like,
Right.
we're here and we're cool and everything's great,
Doesn't really matter.
you know?
No, absolutely.
But I think it's a perspective, not that I wish it on everyone, but I wish that people had the perspective that we have, that
Makes
that like
everything so much more
post
beautiful.
cancer. Yeah.
Yeah.
That life is valuable and, you know, finite, you know, so
Absolutely.
live it. I don't know.
So, when you go through an illness like that, with anyone, I mean, especially with your child, I don't know that a lot of people from the outside recognize that there's a lot of trauma that goes with that for not only the child, but the parent. So, how do you cope with all of that trauma?
A drink now and then. I'm just kidding. I mean, not gonna lie. I think finding a couple answers I have for you, but one of them I will say is finding your bestie on the peds oncology floor. And I found one. I found a few, but I found one specifically that, and I hope my hospital's not listening, but we would sneak alcohol in sometimes and like literally have a drink at night because I was like, I need this. I'm not okay, clearly. And you're stuck in the hospital for weeks at an end. So I'm like, I need something to like
She
just
utilized her support system.
Yeah.
I did. I utilized my support system. My husband like snuck it in for us and then we drank. So this can't go to the hospital. And if it does, I'm sorry. Specifically, I would say, like post, I think working out and keeping busy, keeping my mind actively busy, to not sit and think about the sadness and the
Mhm.
trauma and the grief. I took leave from work when Mac was sick because of the amount of time that we had inpatient. And then unfortunately, when COVID hit, it impacted my job. I was like, okay, I think I can work. We're out of the hospital. And my boss was like, well, business is not doing well right now. Again, work in advertising. We are client-based, client needs, business. And ultimately they ended up furloughing me. And so they could keep me on staff, but could not pay me. So I took unpaid leave and that kind of impacted a lot of my, again, who am I? I am mom who is, dealing with this child who has cancer and that impacted my mental health. So I think, coming out of a lot of that is like finding this time for self-care, which is one term I love during that treatment time, which was like people would make sure to take care of yourself. And I'm like, I am literally with her 24/7. So I'm not sure how I'm supposed to do that. The hospitals don't really have a spa, sauna, gym hookup that I was hoping for.
And
And
they
nor
don't
could I leave
provide the
her
booze,
alone.
so you have to bring it yourself.
I know. Those booths were the outlet. But I think one thing that has really, really, really helped me with a lot of the trauma, because it's there, is a therapist and reading some of these books and reading the book, like reading and knowing you're not alone in talking to other people, having those outlets. It really ultimately just letting out the feelings, being vulnerable, talking about it has really helped me.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Utilizing a support system, seeking the help of others when needed, really just trying to get through it however you can get through it.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's important to recognize that, it's something that big, you just can't do it alone. So, and it does, it takes a lot to try and reach out to people in those situations because I'm sure, not a lot of people understand what that is actually like. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Well, they're not in the mud, I mean,
yeah.
they're watching from the inside out. And I think a lot of people want to help. And I think that they're not really sure how to.
Mhm.
And I think that's where it's like having just like my biggest thing is, and all the support, all the lasagnas, all the things that you can provide are all helpful. But sometimes the people who are, especially the caregivers, they need support too. And just listening, just being there, showing up,
this is kind of morbid but funny. My spouse was diagnosed with cancer, and unfortunately he didn't make it. But when we were, telling, just everyone about the diagnosis, their responses would be like, oh, I have a second cousin that got diagnosed with cancer and they died in like 2 months. And and just some of the responses that you would hear, and you're like, thanks for that. And you don't realize that until you get in that situation. And then I was going back in my mind, like, okay, how many times have I talked about a second cousin to someone who's going through that, and you just really don't know what that's
people
like
don't know what to
until
say. Yeah,
It's just an awkward moment.
it
Yeah.
is. Yeah. And
Yeah.
they were all coming from a good place and
Yeah,
trying to relate, but it was just like, for us in that situation, it was like, oh, okay, thank you.
yeah. Thanks for your optimism and your
Right.
story to share with me.
I
Yeah,
will be good with that.
yeah, yeah.
Good
I want to hear the survival, and I feel like at one point too, like especially early diagnosis, I was like, I want to hear the survival only. You know what I mean?
Oh,
I
you
want to
have
hear the
to.
good
Yeah.
only, and then I mean, after, and I know Shalene, we have talked about this, but I there was a point of time where they were, my therapist was even like, join a support group. And I was like, no, because what I realized during Mac's treatment was that I was an empath and other people's hardships and sadness was affecting me way too much. And we lost kids on our floor and they like gutted me. And I was like, I don't think I can take on more sadness. I've already seen the sadness and I don't think I can hear more of it and then want to feel like I have to help them in
Yeah.
some way.
You're exactly right. You have to be real careful who I follow on social media or how invested I
Right.
get, because if this kiddo, if it goes a certain path, I'm just, sitting at home 700 miles away, hysterical,
I know.
for hours, gut wrenching. And I think you're right. It's just because we're just like a hair breadth away
Line away,
from
I
that.
know.
It's way too close for comfort.
Right.
Way too close for comfort.
Yeah.
To be that invested. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and to your point, it's, cancer is a journey. We don't all have the same journey. And some, but I still believe that it's like you're part of that family now that you've experienced it. But, I mean, I ultimately did join a group called Momcology, and, I don't know if you get a chance to do it. I mean, it is amazing. I mean,
I belong to Momcology. It's great.
yeah,
It's nationwide. Yeah.
it is. It's great, but it was a great support system. But again, there's still a lot of like, I think ultimately, it's a lot of moms trauma bonding, and we're like, okay, well, great. we're all feeling great and we're all sad, but I will say their big thing is the power of the ampersand, which I loved, which is this thought of like you can be hopeful but sad. You can be like more than two, like one emotion at a time, and that's okay. And you just have to show up and face each day
I love
like you
it.
can.
So I want to share, Mac's doing fantastic and she's doing well and
Yeah,
she's
yeah.
wonderful and sassy and healthy
Super
now
sassy.
and in remission. So I want to let everybody know that. And obviously Easton is as well. So I wanted to make sure we touched on that and make sure everybody knows that. But then, we're still like in this ring, and we're still resiliency. We got through the cancer treatment and we got through COVID like rock stars, man. And our kids are doing great, really, really good, knock on wood. And then Lauren, I'm going to throw you back in though. I'm going to throw you back in the ring.
Throw me in.
And now that everything seems to have quote unquote quieted down, what impacts did that have on, your marriage, your, Mac's brother? Yeah. Talk to me about, we're still having to be resilient right now.
So I'll start with her brother first. He's probably the most resilient in my house. Um, he was very affected by her treatment. I think little kids are confused by treatment too. So it was a lot of questions, a lot of things of like, well, can I get this? And what does this mean? And why? And still to this day, she's like, I just don't, he's like, he still questions. He's like, why, how come kids with Down syndrome they're more predisposed to getting cancer? Or, why did she have to go through this? He's become an amazing advocate. He loves his sister so much. I mean, they fight, trust me, they give it to each other, like most kids do. But, he's had to sacrifice. I pulled him out of school, not just during the whole time of COVID. I pulled him after the kids started returning back to school. I still kept him home, and he did a year of homeschool. So kind of just getting back into a normal world for all of us was, we're kind of back in sort of, but it took time, and he's just shown up. He's like now knows that he's a little bit behind in sports from his friends, but he's like, I'm gonna work at it, and I'm gonna make. He had to make friends again. I mean, it was kind of
How old
everything.
is he?
He's almost 10. So
Okay.
he did really like half of kindergarten, first and second, fully at home, and went back in third and now in fourth. But my marriage was, tough. I think there were times, I mean, again, I spent every night, I slept in the hospital every single night. I have major control issues. So I was like, no, 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 I've got this. I think a little bit was also the fact that I saw how much it was affecting him. I know we had to cut Mac's hair and like kind of shave her head down. Her hair was falling out, was getting in her mouth everywhere. And that was one of the first times that I saw that he was really like having a hard time with this. And I wanted to protect him. So I took on more. And I think in some ways I became resentful that I took on more. So it was challenging. I think going through something really hard and people grieving differently definitely affected us. And it affects your marriage. And, I mean, I still think to this day, it's, I still say to him, I'm like, I think you need to talk to somebody. I think you are still clearly dealing with this. And I think even though we're out of it, when we're, 2.5 years post treatment and remission, he's still like the thought every time cancer is brought up, he gets like very upset. So it's been tough. But again, we're moving. Things are, we're slowly getting back into the world, although I'm still working fully remote. They're like, do you want to come into the office? And I'm like, I can't be far from her. I want to make sure that she's safe, and, it keeps my anxiety at ease. And I've thankfully had amazing, bosses that have been really, great with me and understanding and patient. So
Fantastic. So you guys are still in the
yeah.
ring, but you sound like you're doing really well and as best as
We're in
you.
the ring. We're dodging,
Right?
like the small things
Right.
that we
Got
have to
it.
dodge, but we're showing back up. We're showing back up.
And then, in the book, and also we've touched on this almost maybe pretty close to every episode so far. We will touch on this repeatedly, though, as the underlying kind of, obviously not just support system, but support system for men. And so when you talked about, like we know what's available to us and what we had, peers, we had people at the hospital, we have friends, we have,
Right.
momcology that is just for moms, clearly in the name. And so when you had mentioned, hey, you recognize that your husband needs the support, especially with this cancer related diagnosis. Do you feel like personally that there are ample outlets for men, for dads?
I do. I mean, there is a foundation that's around here that they do, they send things for Father's Day, but and I think and even in the Down syndrome diagnosis world, like there's rockin' dads and other things, but it's not the same in the cancer world. And I think, ultimately it does. I feel like they're more of the focus, and more times moms are the caregivers, but
I would agree. Yeah.
I I do think that, and I think that's just based on like, my husband he had to go back to work. We needed his insurance. So I was like, see you. I will
He's
take
his
leave.
dad as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
He had to go back to work. He didn't have He didn't even
We
have the
didn't have
option.
an option. Right.
Yeah.
Well, I was like, your insurance is better than mine and we need your insurance, and, you know, off to work you go. But I do, I agree with you. I don't think and I also think there's this stigma of like of men feeling that they can't share the emotion, right? Like they can't be vulnerable. But
Especially at that time, right? They need to step up and be,
right,
right, because that's kind of a time of crisis.
right.
And so and that, I think that's important. Yeah, you just clicked on that they can't.
They
I
can't
just
feel
not
like
even
they
an
have to
option for
protect
them.
their family. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's a protection thing. And, you know, I mean, but I think then there were times that I stepped in to kind of be like, this is your time. You take this week, you know,
Right.
like if you want to go in the bath, if you want to go cry it out, if you want to go for a drive and scream, whatever you want to do, I got this. But then again, I think at some point it affected me too. But yeah, I do. But
I
I've
just
told
always
my
feel
husband,
like
I was
that's
like, go,
worth noting, yeah, and
Yeah.
bringing
yeah.
up that.
I was like, go talk to a therapist, because I am all for therapy. I'm like, everyone should have a therapist. Everyone.
I agree.
Therapists have therapists, just so we're clear.
Yeah.
A
No, I
hundred,
think
you're
mental health is
100%.
just as important as your physical health. You should get like, your 30
Yeah,
minutes of exercise daily and your weekly therapy. I mean, we need to take
yeah,
care of our minds as much as our body. They're very
yeah,
much intertwined. And you can't have one without, you got to have them both
right.
operating.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I agree. I mean,
Yeah.
corporate America is now bringing on therapists, you know,
Uh-huh.
to talk to us. So, you know, why not, right? Everybody's
Absolutely.
doing it. Everyone's doing it.
Was there a certain round in the book just on your personal that resonated with you more than just
I
chit
mean,
chat?
I feel like the part that you were when you were touching on before about the Lego piece, and that was honestly, I just remember I was actually sitting watching my son, because I reread it, but I was watching him swim, and I was just thinking in that moment about the same thing that you were touching on before. I was like, this is really like, it put me in that moment too of hearing the
Mhm.
diagnosis, and I feel like that's a day that I can relive. Um, I mean, I remember what I was wearing. I remember what we were doing. I remember every single piece of that day. Not the Lego piece, the diagnosis piece. But you know, it was a major pivotal moment in my life that everyone remembers certain things, right? Like 9/11, you know where you were, you get a cancer diagnosis for anyone, for yourself, for your child, whoever it is, you're going to remember every single thing about that moment.
Yeah,
And
because time stops right there.
time
It just
stops.
stops.
And that's what I used to
Yeah,
say. I was like,
yeah, time
my
stops.
life just stopped in that moment. And I think that was a really hard part for me too, when I was like watching social media, literally the days following that diagnosis. I'm like, how is the world continuing to move when my life just crumbled
It's
to the
just
floor?
yeah, the whole bottom falls out. Yeah. Yeah, I definitely do that in the book as well, Lauren, where I'm like, this is the day, this is the temperature, this is what Easton was doing, this is what
Right.
we had for dinner. Like I could tell you every
Everything about that
single like
moment. Yeah.
minute of that moment, and it's
Yeah.
crazy, but I couldn't remember where I put my sunglasses an hour
But
ago.
an hour before, she was sitting in the pool outside, like you said, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like, was how your life can just
yeah,
in a split second completely upend
yeah.
and change. And
It's
it does.
so go ahead, go
Oh,
ahead.
no, go
No.
ahead. What advice would you give to any other cancer warrior moms out there that may be going through active treatment or dealing with any trauma from post treatment?
Um, it's a great question. I don't know. I would say find your friend, find your person, find the community that can, you know, you can walk alongside in the journey, because I think there's a lot of, and while others who may not be walking in the mud with you, while they try to want to help, and they will, if they want to, no one really understands unless they're in it. And when you find them, that's your family. And I know it's trauma bonding and whatnot, but sometimes, like getting a hug. I remember like seeing this one mother who brought her son in, down to surgery, and she came upstairs by herself, and she like just was starting to go to her room. She was from Texas, and she was here in New Jersey for treatment for her son, not living with her other children, with her husband for literally probably like a year and a half. And just seeing her in that moment, I grabbed her and I was just like, come here. And she let it out. And I mean, I've hugged nurses in the hallways. And I think that's one thing that people forget too, is our nurses are angels, and they have taken the weight of our children's cancer on them as well. And like, check in on your nurses. They care so much about your kids and our kids, and they have willingly signed up to take this job to help them. And I think it's super honorable and amazing. I love our nurses, but I would say, yeah, find your, and maybe your people are the nurses. Maybe your people are, your friend that you find on Facebook who's going through it with you a month in advance, but has a similar diagnosis. Maybe it's, whoever it is, the lady at CVS who's prescribed, who's giving you your chemo meds. I don't know. But finding those people who kind of keep you afloat.
Absolutely. I agree. I know that our chats personally really got me through a lot of times too, just being able to check in and see how you all were doing and going through it. And that
Yeah.
always,
Or I'm
that
like,
always
why is he
helps.
still in the hospital? What's going on? And you're like, she's okay. She just had a fever or whatever it is. But
Yeah.
oh, good, we're going home now. I'm like, okay, good.
Okay, good. So, like you can
Well,
breathe.
because
Yeah.
I think you feel it, right? Like, I'm just
Yeah.
like, okay, like it actually would affect me. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh my God, I hope she's okay. And I was so invested in her well-being as well. Because I think of the fact that we were going through that journey together. So
Yeah,
yeah,
very much same age, both little girls, just cute as can be, both have Down syndrome, both same diagnosis,
right.
uh, just right by each other. So it was kind of like, okay, here we go, man. We're doing this together. Like, let's go, girls. Like,
Yeah,
we
let's
gotta
do
get through.
this. We're
We
all
gotta
on the
get
same
through it.
bus. Let's get to the end of it.
Yeah, yeah. And we
And we
did.
did. Yeah, we did.
We
I know.
did.
We said that in unison. I like it. I know. Yeah. But
Very
I just think
resilient.
that
I mean, when we talk about resilience, Lauren, you're doing it, man. You're doing it big.
we're all doing it. We're all doing it. Because we have to, right? I mean, I think that was the one big thing too, right? Like, people are like, I don't know how you do it. And you're like, well, you're not really given a choice.
Right,
You have
right.
to.
There's
And
no other option.
yeah, I didn't check this box. I
Right.
wanted, I would like the no cancer, live in Hawaii box,
Right.
but I didn't
No
get that
cancer,
one.
no
So
COVID box, but I mean, we just kind of got
yeah,
thrown in the mix. Like,
would have loved a non-world pandemic plague box.
like,
That didn't come my way either. So I mean, it was kind of shit on top of shit. And what are you gonna do? It's just,
get
you
through
can
the shit.
either lay down or you
Mhm.
can fight. And I think that was what we as a family decided to do. And I think, the fighters find the fighters.
That's all right. I love that. We do. We do. We got to rally together, man.
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you
absolutely.
so much for sharing. I know
Absolutely.
this will help lots of people and especially other cancer parents, but everybody in general. Inspiration, like if Lauren can do it,
Yeah.
we
No,
can get through it.
I'm no high bar. We're just moms, getting through the things. But if anybody in your community needs it, please share my email. I'm happy to talk to anybody.
Oh, well, yeah. Utilize you as a support system, as a resource.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Good idea.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, sharing your story. And like Shalene said, this will definitely be creating some positive waves within the community. So
Thank you for having me.